Even, even if it's not a song you wrote, it's still fun to go in there and see what you can do, how you can make it.
George Strait, the king of country, has given us decades of unforgettable music, unwavering grace, and timeless performances. But now country music fans are crying, and not just from nostalgia. The recent news surrounding George has left fans across the world emotional. In 2025, he was honored with the prestigious Kennedy Center honor, a crowning moment in a legendary career. But as Strait humbly accepted, fans noticed something deeper, a sense of finality in his voice. This came after a deeply personal season of loss. In 2024, George lost Irv Woolsey, his manager and closest ally, and Gene Elders, his longtime fiddle player, two of the most important figures in his musical journey, gone. These tragedies cast a long shadow over his latest album, Cowboys and Dreamers, which he quietly dedicated to their memory, and just when it seemed George was reaching new heights, breaking the U.S. concert attendance record with over 110,000 fans. Another artist broke that record in 2025. It wasn't just about numbers, it was symbolic, a passing of the torch. But George's heart remains in Texas. When devastating floods hit his home state, he organized a benefit concert that raised over $6.25 million. He didn't just show up, he gave back. Fans aren't crying because George Strait is gone. They're crying because they know the curtain may be slowly closing on a one-of-a-kind legend. And like his music, that realization hits deep, right in the heart. In a career filled with chart-topping hits, sold-out stadiums, and countless accolades, George Strait never chased the spotlight, yet it always found him. In 2025, the spotlight turned emotional when he was named one of the year's Kennedy Center honorees, the highest cultural award in the United States. And for many fans watching at home, the honor didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like something far more tender and painful. Dressed in his usual understated elegance, Strait accepted the award with grace. But behind his smile was the look of a man who understood exactly what the moment meant. This wasn't just recognition for a job well done. It was the world beginning to say thank you. And perhaps goodbye. Just months earlier, he had been honored with the Willie Nelson Lifetime Achievement Award at the CMA Awards, another emotional moment that tugged at the hearts of millions. But this time, as he took the microphone, fans noticed something different. He wasn't the confident cowboy striding through hit after hit. He was reflective, soft-spoken, emotional. He didn't talk about records or fame. He talked about love. He thanked his wife, Norma, the woman who stood by him through every chapter of his life, for 53 years of unwavering support. He honored his late bandmates and collaborators. He paused more than once to collect himself. This wasn't a victory speech. It was a love letter. For fans who followed Strait for decades, these public honors were bittersweet. Yes, they were overdue acknowledgments of his legacy, but they also felt like milestones marking the final stretch of a long, beautiful road. George Strait is not the kind of man who will declare his retirement with fanfare. If he rides away, it'll be quietly, humbly, the way he's done everything. And these recent honors have left fans wondering if that moment is drawing near. The emotion isn't just about the past, it's about the uncertainty of the future. How many more albums? How many more tours? Will there be another chance to hear Amarillo by Morning live from the man himself? These are the questions haunting the hearts of country music fans. But even in the heaviness, there's a deep sense of gratitude. In a world where fame often comes with scandal and spectacle, George Strait has remained a figure of dignity. He never needed to reinvent himself. He never chased trends. He simply stood tall, in boots and a hat, and told the truth through song. And perhaps that's what makes these honors hit so hard. They're not just awards, they're bookends. Beautiful, heartfelt acknowledgments that remind us just how rare George Strait truly is. And while he may not be saying goodbye just yet, the tears country music fans are shedding are not just for the man, but for what his legacy represents, a disappearing kind of greatness. Behind every great artist is a team, a brotherhood, a silent army of friends who help carry the weight of legacy. For George Strait, that army has always been small, loyal, and deeply personal. But in the past year, the pillars that held up Strait's career have begun to fall, leaving fans and the king of country himself mourning the quiet disappearance of the people who made the music possible. In early 2024, Irv Woolsey, George Strait's longtime manager and confidant, passed away. To many in the public, Woolsey was just a name in liner notes. But to George, he was the man who believed in him before the world ever heard his voice. It was Woolsey who discovered him, shaped his image, fought for him at record labels, and stuck with him for over 4 decades. Losing a manager is one thing. Losing a best friend is another. And for Strait, Woolsey was both. At the next show, George didn't say much. He didn't have to. Just a quiet nod to the heavens, a mist in his eyes, and a fiddle tune played with more ache than usual. But fate wasn't finished. Just months later, George lost Gene Elders, his longtime fiddle player and a core part of his legendary ace in the whole band. For decades, Elders stood just a few feet away from George on stage, bringing to life the haunting fiddle solos in songs like The Chair and Amarillo by Morning. Elders wasn't just a musician. He was part of the soul of George Strait's sound. His death didn't make major headlines, but for die-hard fans, it was a gut punch. Another piece of the magic was gone. These back-to-back losses hit harder than most people knew. And George, ever the private cowboy, didn't open up much. But when his 2024 album Cowboys and Dreamers dropped, fans noticed something tucked in the liner notes, a quiet dedication to Irv and Gene. No press release. No televised tribute, just a few lines of love and loss, buried in the folds of a record that feels more like a reflection than a celebration. Listening to the album, you can hear the grief. You can feel it in the pacing, the themes, the way George seems to linger a little longer on certain lines. Songs that speak of memory, of looking back, of longing for things no longer within reach. It's the kind of pain that doesn't shout, it sings. For fans, these losses feel strangely personal. Because when you've followed an artist for 40 years, their world becomes part of yours. You recognize the faces in the band, the voices in the harmonies, the names scrolling across the credits. Losing them feels like losing a family member, and watching George lose them feels like watching a father grieve. The emotion isn't just about Irv or Gene, it's about what their absence means. A slow unraveling of the fabric that held a musical era together. And in that unraveling, fans see something terrifyingly human, time catching up to a man who always seemed untouchable. It's not often that country music royalty lets you see the cracks beneath the crown. But in 2024, George Strait showed them, not through words but through quiet sorrow, tender tributes, and music that aches in all the right places. And for millions of fans who grew up with him, that pain resonates. Because they're not just crying for the ones he lost. They're crying because they know, sooner than they'd like, he too will step away from the stage. And only the songs will remain. When George Strait took the stage at Kyle Field in College Station, Texas in the summer of 2024, the energy in the stadium wasn't just electric, it was historic. 110,905 fans filled the venue, making it the largest ticketed concert by a single artist in U.S. history. For those in attendance, it was more than a concert. It was a pilgrimage. The roar of the crowd, the sight of cowboy hats waving in unison, and the echo of Troubadour under the Texas sky. It was a moment etched into the soul of country music forever. But for many, it also felt like a last hurrah. There was something reverent in the way George moved across the stage, like a man honoring every memory and every mile behind him. It was triumphant, yes, but also tender, as if George himself knew this chapter wouldn't come again. And then came the twist that made fans' hearts ache all over again. Just over a year later, in September 2025, rising star Zach Bryan broke George Strait's attendance record. His concert at Michigan Stadium drew 112,408 people, barely edging out George's iconic number. Objectively, it was a win for country music, a sign of the genre's growing power. But for Strait's loyal fan base, it was a symbolic loss, one that stung far more than numbers should. Because it wasn't about competition, it was about legacy. George had set that record not in his prime, but at 72, decades after most artists would have bowed out. It was proof that time hadn't taken his throne. Until now, social media lit up with mixed emotions. Some fans celebrated the genre's expansion, while others mourned the shift.
He earned that record with a lifetime of grit, one longtime listener posted.
And now it's already gone. The emotion wasn't directed at Zach Bryan, who respects George deeply, but at the sobering reminder that all things, even records, are temporary. For fans who had clung to George Strait as a steady symbol in a fast-changing world, the loss of his record felt like another sign that the old guard was fading. Not violently, not bitterly, but quietly, softly, the way cowboys ride off when the story ends. George himself didn't issue a statement. He never does. His silence, like always, speaks volumes. Perhaps because for him, it was never about numbers. He once said, "I just try to make the best music I can, and let the rest take care of itself." And he meant it. But still, those close to the industry know that record was special to him. Not because of what it proved, but because of what it represented. The loyalty of his fans, the endurance of his music, and the Texas pride that runs through everything he does. And yet even as the record slipped away, the moment didn't. That night at Kyle Field remains untouchable in spirit. The tears fans shed weren't for the lost record. They were for the moment itself, how it felt to sing along with 110,000 others, how it felt to see their hero standing strong in the twilight of his career, how it felt to be part of history. Because what George Strait gave them that night was something no attendance number can ever measure, a memory that will last long after the final note fades. In a time when celebrity charity often feels performative, George Strait reminded the world what quiet generosity truly looks like. When devastating floods swept through Texas's hill country in July 2025, displacing families and destroying communities, George didn't issue a press release or post a flashy video. He simply acted, quickly, quietly, and with the full weight of his heart behind it. Announcing a one-night-only benefit concert and dinner titled Straight to the Heart in his hometown of Bourne, Texas, George turned grief into grace. Tickets sold out almost instantly, not because of the marketing, but because people know who George Strait really is. And they trust him. Held on July 27th, the event was intimate and emotional. George didn't headline an arena. He stood beneath soft lighting in front of hundreds, not thousands, and performed like it was the last show he'd ever give. And to many who were lucky enough to be there, it felt like it might be. He performed stripped-down versions of songs that had once filled stadiums. "I Can Still Make Cheyenne," "Carrying Your Love With Me," and a haunting version of "The Cowboy Rides Away" that left more than a few in tears. And when he spoke between songs, it wasn't with a script. It was raw, vulnerable. A man speaking directly to his people, his home, and his faith. By the end of the night, over $6.25 million had been raised for flood victims and first responders. But the money was just part of the story. What moved people most was the spirit behind it, the unshakable commitment to community that's defined Strait's life from the beginning. He wasn't doing this for attention. He was doing it because he still sees himself as a rancher, a Texan, and a man who doesn't walk away when people are hurting. In an era where so many performers distance themselves from real-world pain, George Strait ran toward it. The evening was filled with tender moments, but one in particular stood out. Midway through the set, George paused and looked out into the crowd, his voice breaking slightly as he said, "This may be the most important show I've ever played." Fans knew what he meant. This wasn't about charts or records. It was about giving, his time, his music, his presence, one last time from the heart. Some say they saw tears in his eyes when he finished his final song and tipped his hat before walking off stage. He didn't promise more shows. He didn't tease a new album. He just said, "Thank you," and walked away. For longtime fans, it felt like the closing of a chapter. Not a grand farewell, but something more powerful. A graceful exit that stayed true to everything George Strait ever was. Not loud, not flashy, just honest, humble, and full of heart. In that small Texas town, surrounded by neighbors and fans who loved him, George gave one last gift, not just in dollars raised, but in the memories shared, the music echoed, and the silence he left behind. And maybe that's why country music fans are crying now. Not because George Strait is gone, but because everything he stands for, the values, the loyalty, the quiet strength, is becoming rarer by the day. His legacy is more than music. It's moments like these that remind us what country really means.